Chapter 14. Lewis liked Boston the minute he saw it from the sky. Far beneath him was a river. Near the river was a park. In the park was a lake. In the lake was an island. On the shore was a dock. Tied to the dock was a boat shaped like a swan. The place looked ideal. There was even a very fine hotel nearby. Lewis circled twice, then glided down and splashed to a stop in the lake. Several ducks swam up to look at him. The park was called the Public Garden. Everybody in Boston knows about it and goes there to sit on benches in the sun, to stroll about, to feed the pigeons and the squirrels, and to ride the swan boat. A ride cost 25 cents for grown-ups and 15 cents for children. I wonder how much it costs now. After a short rest and a bite to eat, Lewis swam over to the dock and climbed out on the shore. The man who was taking tickets for the swan boat ride seemed surprised to see an enormous white swan wearing so many things around his neck. "Hello," said the boatman. Lewis lifted his trumpet. "Cahow," he replied. At the sound, every bird in the park looked up. The boatman jumped. Boston residents as far as a mile away looked up and said, "What was that?" Nobody in Boston had ever heard of a trumpet or swan. The sound made a big impression. People eating a late breakfast in the Ritz Hotel on Arlington Street looked up from their food. Waiters and bellboys said, "What's that?" The man in charge of the swan boat was probably the most surprised man in Boston. He examined Lewis's trumpet, his money bag, his life-saving medal, his slate, and his chalk pencil. Then he asked Lewis what he wanted. Lewis wrote on his slate, "Have trumpet, need work." "Okay," said the boatman, "you've got yourself a job. A boat leaves here in 5 minutes for a trip around the lake. Your job will be to swim in front of the boat, leading the way and blowing your horn." "What salary do I get?" asked Lewis on his slate. "We'll settle that later, when we see how well you make out," said the boatman. "This is just a tryout." Lewis nodded. He arranged his things neatly around his neck, entered the water quickly, took up a position a few yards in front of the boat, and waited. He wondered what would make the boat go. He couldn't see any outboard motor, and there were no oars. In the forward part of the boat were benches for the passengers. In the stern was a structure that was shaped like a swan. It was hollow. Inside of that was a seat, like a bicycle seat. And there were 2 pedals inside, like the pedals of a boat. Have you guys ever seen one of those boats where you pedal it like a bike? A paddle boat is what it's called. Have you ever seen those? That's kind of what it's like. When the passengers were all aboard, a young man appeared. He climbed into the stern of the boat and sat down on the seat inside the hollow swan-shaped structure and began to push the pedals with his feet, as though he were riding a bike. A paddle wheel began to turn. The boatman cast the lines off, and as the young man paddled, the swan boat slowly moved out into the lake. Lewis led the way, swimming with his left foot, holding his trumpet with his right foot. Geez, he is just very talented, isn't he? "Cahow!" Then, realizing that he should play something appropriate, Lewis played a song that he had heard the boys sing at camp. "Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream." The swan boat passengers were beside themselves with joy and excitement. Oh, that's a great picture, huh? A real live swan playing a trumpet. Life was a dream, all right. What a lark. What fun. What pleasure. "This is real groovy," called a boy in the front seat. "That bird is as good as Louis Armstrong, the famous trumpet player. I'm going to call him Louis." When Louis heard this, he swam alongside the boat, took his chalk pencil in his mouth, and wrote, "That's actually my name." "Hey, how about that?" yelled the boy. "The swan can write too. Louis can write. Let's give him a cheer." The passengers cheered loudly. Lewis swam ahead again, leading the way. Slowly and gracefully, the boat circled the island. When Lewis played Gentle on My Mind on his trumpet, while Lewis played, it was a lovely September morning, hazy and warm. Trees were beginning to show their autumn colors. Lewis played Old Man River. When the Swan boat docked and the passengers got off, long lines of people were waiting to get aboard for the next ride. Business was booming. Another boat was being made ready to accommodate the crowds. Everyone wanted to ride the Swan boat behind a real swan, live swan playing a trumpet. It was the biggest happening in Boston in a long time. People like strange events and queer happenings, and the Swan boat with Lewis out front leading the way suddenly became the most popular attraction in Boston. "You're hired," said the boatman when Lewis climbed out onto the bank. "With you playing the trumpet, I can double my business. I can triple it. I can quadruple it. I can quintuple it. I can sextuple it. Anyway, I'll give you a steady job." Lewis lifted his slate. "What salary?" he asked. The boatman gazed around at the crowds waiting to get aboard. $100 a week. Remember what he earned over the summer? For the whole summer? He's earning that same amount now each week. He's going to be rich. "I'll pay you $100 every Saturday if you will swim ahead of the boats and play your horn. Is it a deal?" Lewis nodded his head. The man seemed pleased but puzzled. "If it isn't too much to ask," said the boatman, "would you mind telling me why you're so interested in money?" "Everybody is," replied Lewis on a slate. "Yeah, I know," said the boatman. "Everybody likes money. It's a crazy world. But, why would a swan need money? You can get your meals just by dipping down and pulling up tasty plants at the bottom of the lake. What do you need money for?" Lewis erased his slate. "I'm in debt," he wrote. Boys and girls, what's a debt? Does anybody know? A debt is when you owe someone something. You could say, have you maybe ever heard, "I owe you a debt of gratitude." So it's like, I owe you thanks. I'm grateful, right? Or if you have to pay a debt, it means that you have a bill or something to pay. So a debt means you owe someone something. Okay? Maybe someone's even done you a favor and you say, "Oh, I'm indebted to you." That means I owe you a favor now. "I am in debt," he wrote. And he thought about his poor father who had stolen the trumpet, and about the poor storekeeper in Billings who he had robbed and whose store had been damaged. Lewis knew he must go on earning money until he could pay off what he owned. "Okay," said the boatman, addressing the crowd. "This swan says he's in debt. All aboard for the next ride." And he began selling tickets. The boatman owned several boats, and all of them were shaped like a swan. Pretty soon, every boat was full, and the money was flowing in. All day long, the swan boats circled the lake, carrying their load of happy people, many of them children. Lewis played his trumpet as he had never played it before. He liked the job. He loved to entertain people, and he loved music. The boatman was just as pleased as he could be. When the day was over and the boats had made their last trip, the boatman walked over to Lewis, who was standing on shore arranging his things. "You've done great," said the boatman. "You are a good swan. I wish I had you a long time ago. And now, where are you planning to spend the night?" "Here on the lake," Lewis wrote. "Well, I don't know about that," said the man uneasily. "An awful lot of people are curious about you. They might make trouble for you. Bad boys might molest you. I don't trust people who hang around the park at night. You might get kidnapped. I don't want to lose you. I think I'll take you across to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel and get you a room for the night. It's clean and the food is good. It would be safer. Then I can be sure you'll come to work in the morning." So boys and girls, this trumpet playing, reading and writing, life-saving swan is now going to stay in the hotel. I don't know if he's going to sleep in the bed. We'll have to see. And eat in the hotel. So silly. Louis didn't think much of this idea, but he agreed to go. He thought, well, I've never spent a night in a hotel. Maybe it would be an interesting experience. So he walked along with the boatman. They left the park and crossed Arlington Street and entered the lobby of the Ritz. It had been a long, tiring day for Louis, but he felt relieved to know that he had a good job and could earn money in Boston as a musician. So, boys and girls, the Ritz-Carlton is a very fancy hotel. I'm sure you've been in like fancy hotels before and maybe not so fancy, so you kind of know the difference. The Ritz is very fancy. Okay, chapter 15, A Night at the Ritz. When the desk clerk at the Ritz Hotel saw the boatman enter the lobby, followed by an enormous snow-white swan with a black beak, the clerk didn't like it at all. The clerk was a carefully dressed man, very neat, his hair nicely combed. The boatman stepped boldly up to the desk. "I'd like a single room for tonight for my friend here," said the boatman. The clerk shook his head. "No birds," he said. "The Ritz doesn't take birds." "You take celebrities, don't you?" asked the boatman. "Certainly," replied the clerk. "You'd take Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, wouldn't you, if they wanted to spend the night?" "Well, of course," replied the clerk. "You'd take Queen Elizabeth, wouldn't you?" "Of course." "Okay," said the boatman. "My friend here is a celebrity." I love that picture. Look at all the stuff around his neck. That is so funny. Just a regular swan, all that stuff around his neck, staying in a hotel. "He is a famous musician. He created a sensation in the public garden this afternoon. You must have heard the commotion. He's a trumpeter swan, and he plays like the great Armstrong." The clerk gazed suspiciously at Louis. "Has he any luggage?" asked the clerk. "Luggage?" cried the boatman. "Take a look at him. Look at the stuff he's got with him." "Well, I don't know," said the clerk, staring at Louis's possessions. His trumpet, his money bag, his slate, his chalk pencil, and his life-saving medal. "A bird is a bird. How do I know he hasn't got lice?" "Birds often have lice. The Ritz won't take anyone that has lice." "Lice?" roared the boatman. "Did you ever see a cleaner guest in your whole life? Look at him. He's immaculate." At this point, Louis held up his slate to the clerk. "No lice," he wrote. The clerk stared in amazement. He was beginning to weaken. That means he's starting to change his mind. "Well, I have to be careful," he said to the boatman. "You say he's a celebrity. How do I know he's famous? You may just be kidding me about that." Just then, 3 young girls entered the lobby. They were giggling and squealing. One of them pointed to Louis. "There he is," she screamed. "There he is. I'll get his autograph." The girls rushed up to Louis. The first girl held out a pad and pencil. "May I have your autograph?" she asked. Louis took the pencil. Very gracefully, he wrote Louis on the pad. More squeals, more giggles, and the girls rushed away. The clerk watched in silence. Boys and girls, don't you think that's a good sign of a celebrity? A celebrity is someone who's famous, someone that a lot of people know. So wouldn't it be a good sign that it's a celebrity if children came up and wanted their autograph? So it was kind of perfect timing, wasn't it? Kind of proof that he really is a celebrity. "There," said the boatman. "Is he a celebrity or isn't he?" The clerk hesitated. He was beginning to think he would have to give Louis a room. At this point, Louis had an idea. He lifted his trumpet and began to play an old song called "There's a Small Hotel." "There's a small hotel with a wishing well." His tone was beautiful. Guests passing through the lobby paused to listen. The clerk leaned his elbows on the desk and listened attentively. The man behind the newsstand looked up and listened. People sitting upstairs in the lounge put down their cocktails and listened. The bellboys stared and listened. For a few minutes, everything stopped in the lobby where Louis played. He charmed everyone who could hear. Chambermaids in the bedrooms paused in their work to listen to the trumpet. It was a moment of sheer magic. As the song came to an end, the people who knew the words sang them softly. When the steeple bell says, "Good night, sleep well," we'll thank the small hotel together. Boys and girls, that reminds me of the cricket in Times Square, doesn't it? When he would play the music and it was like magic and everybody would stop and listen. It's just like it. How about that? Asked the boatman, grinning at the clerk. Is this swan a musician or isn't he? He plays a sweet trumpet, said the clerk. But there is one more question that I hesitate to bring up. What about his personal habits? Will he mess the room all up? Actors are bad enough. Musicians are worse. I can't allow a large bird to occupy one of our beds. It might put us out of business. Other guests might complain. I sleep in the bathtub, Louis wrote on his slate. Will not disturb bed. The clerk shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Who's going to pay the bill? He asked. I am, replied the boatman. I'll be here early tomorrow morning when Louis checks out. The clerk couldn't think of any more reasons for not letting the swan have a room. Very well, he said. Sign the register, please. He handed Louis a pen and a card. Louis wrote, Louis the Swan, Upper Red Rock Lake, Montana. The clerk studied it. He seemed satisfied at last. He summoned a bellboy and handed him a key. Take this gentleman to his room, he ordered. Louis removed his medal, his trumpet, his slate, his chalk pencil, and his money bag and handed them to the bellboy. Together they walked to the elevators. The boatman said goodbye. Sleep well, Louis, called the boatman, and be ready to come to work promptly in the morning. Louis nodded. The elevator door opened. This way, sir, said the bellboy. They entered the elevator and waited for the door to close. A rich smell of perfume filled the air. Louis stood very still. Then he felt himself rising. The elevator stopped on the 7th floor. The bellboy led Louis to a room, unlocked the door, and ushered him in. Here you are, sir. Would you like a window open? The bellboy put Louis's luggage down, snapped on a few lights, opened a window, and laid the room key on the dresser. Then he waited. I guess he wants a tip, thought Louis. So he went to his money bag. He loosened the drawstring, and he took out $1. Thank you very much, sir, said the bellboy, taking the $1. He went out and closed the door softly behind him. Louis was alone at last, alone in a room at the Ritz. Louis had never spent a night alone in a hotel. First, he walked around and around, switching lights on and off, examining everything. In the writing desk, he found a few sheets of paper that said, Ritz-Carlton, Boston. Boys and girls, this is what you do when you walk into a hotel room, isn't it? You walk around, you see what's there, you turn on the lights, open the closets, find the paper, look for a pen. Don't you? I know you do. He felt mussy and dirty, so he went into the bathroom, climbed into the tub, pulled the shower curtain across. Can't you just see him go with his beak? Pull the shower curtain across and took a shower bath. It felt good and reminded him of the water fights he used to have with his brothers and sisters. He was careful not to splash any water out of the tub. When he finished, he stood for a while, admiring the bath mat and preening his feathers. That means he's cleaning himself up a little bit. Then he felt hungry. On the wall of the bedroom, he found a button that said, Waiter. Louis put his beak against the button and pressed hard. In a few minutes, there was a knock at the door, and a waiter entered. He was nicely dressed and tried not to show how surprised he was to find a swan in the room. May I get you something? He asked. Louis picked up his chalk pencil. 12 watercress sandwiches, please. The waiter thought for a moment. Are you expecting guests? He asked. Louis shook his head. And you want 12 watercress sandwiches? Louis nodded. Very good, sir, said the waiter. Do you wish to have them with mayonnaise? Oh my gosh, look at that picture. Louis didn't even know what mayonnaise tasted like, but he thought fast. He cleaned his slate and wrote 1 with, 11 without. So he's going to give it a try. The waiter bowed and left the room. Half an hour later, he was back. He rolled a table into the room, placed a huge platter of watercress sandwiches on it, along with a plate, a knife, a fork, a spoon, salt and pepper, a glass of water, a linen napkin nicely folded. There was also a butter dish with several pieces of butter covered with cracked ice. The waiter arranged everything carefully, then handed Louis a bill to sign. The bill said, 12 watercress sandwiches, $18. Goodness, thought Louis, this is an expensive place. I hope the boatman won't be mad when he sees the supper charge on the bill tomorrow morning. He borrowed the pencil from the waiter and signed the bill. Louis the Swan. The waiter took the bill and stood there, waiting. I guess he wants a tip, thought Louis. So he opened his money bag again and drew out $2 and handed it to the waiter, who thanked him, bowed again, and went away. Because the Swan had such a long neck, the table was just the right height for Louis. He didn't need a chair. He ate his supper standing up. He tried the sandwich that had the mayonnaise on it and decided he didn't like mayonnaise. Then he carefully pulled each sandwich apart. All he really wanted was the watercress. He piled the slices of bread in 2 neat piles, scooped the watercress onto his plate, and had a nice supper. He did not touch the butter. When he was thirsty, instead of drinking from the glass of water, he went into the bathroom, drew a basin full of cold water, and drank that. Then he took his napkin, wiped his beak, pushed the table out of the way. He felt much better. To be alone in a hotel room gives a person a cozy feeling and a feeling of importance. Louis felt great, but soon he began feeling rather lonely too. He thought of Sam Beaver. He thought of Camp Kookooskoos. He thought of his father and mother and sisters and brothers back home in Montana. He thought of Serena, the swan he loved, and how wonderful she was. The words of the song he had played in the lobby came back to him. There's a small hotel with a wishing well. I wish that we were there together. How wonderful it would be, he thought, if Serena could be here at the Ritz to enjoy this hotel with him. The waiter had left an evening paper on the table. Louis glanced at the front page. To his amazement, he saw a picture of himself on the lake in the public garden with the swan boat. A big headline said, Boston goes wild over the Trumpet of the Swan. The news story began. There's a new bird in town. His name is Louis. He is a trumpeter swan that really plays the trumpet. Incredible though it may seem, this rare and beautiful water bird has accepted employment with the Swan Boat Management in the public garden and is entertaining boat riders with his smooth trumpet. Crowds gathered at the lake this afternoon after his arrival, and the sweet notes of his horn were heard in many parts of Boston. Louis read the article to the end and then tore it out of the paper. Sam Beaver ought to know about this, he thought. From the writing desk in the room, Louis took a pen and a sheet of letter paper. This is what he wrote. Thank you. Oh, this is a long chapter. Dear Sam, I'm spending the night at the Ritz in fashionable surroundings. You were right about Boston. It is very pleasant. I was able to find work as soon as I arrived. I am associated with the Swan Boat at the salary of $100 a week. You may be interested in the enclosed clipping from today's paper. If all goes well, I'll soon have enough money to pay my father's debt to the music store. And then I will own the trumpet free and clear and will hope that by blowing it passionately, I will be able to make a favorable impression on a young female that I am in love with. Then everybody will be happy. My father's honor will be restored. The music shop in Billings will be repaid, and I can take a wife. I hope that you are well. I miss you. A hotel room, even though it has every convenience, can be a lonely place. Your friend, Louis. Louis addressed the envelope to Sam, folded the letter, fitted the newspaper clipping in it, and found a 6-cent stamp in his money bag. Boy, I guess he has everything in there, huh? He sealed the envelope, pasted the stamp on it, and dropped the letter in a mail chute outside the door of his room. Now I'll go to sleep, he thought. He went into the bathroom, used the toilet, then drew a full tub of cold water in the bathtub. He couldn't get Serena out of his mind. How wonderful it would be if only she were here. Before settling down for the night, he picked up his trumpet and played the song he had composed for her while he was in Ontario. Oh, ever in the greening spring, by bank and bough retiring, for love I shall be sorrowing, and swans of my desiring. He tried to play softly, but in a minute the phone rang in his room. Louis lifted the receiver and put it to his ear. I'm sorry, sir, the voice said, but I have to ask you not to make so much noise. The Ritz does not allow its guests to play brass instruments in the bedrooms. Louis hung up the phone and put his trumpet away. Then he turned out the lights. He climbed into the tub, curved his long neck around to the right, rested his head on his back, tucked his bill under his wing, and lay there, floating on the water, his head cradled softly in his feathers. Soon he was asleep, dreaming of little lakes in the north in the springtime, dreaming of Serena, his true love. Boys and girls, look at those last 2 sentences. Look at all those commas. Look at the second to last sentence. Then he turned out the lights, comma, climbed into the tub, comma, curved his long neck around to the right, comma, rested his head on his back, comma, tucked his bill under his wing, comma, and lay there, comma, floating on the water, comma, his head cradled softly in his feathers. The next one has a lot too. Soon he was asleep, comma, dreaming of little lakes in the north in the springtime, comma, dreaming of Serena, comma, his true love. And what do we do for commas? Pause.
And.
Pause, pause, pause. Okie dokie, work on your comprehension questions.